Tonight, nationwide hikes up mortgage rates. A winter recession could be about to be confirmed. One of the country's top economists tells me he thinks the economy will keep flatlining for another year. Who's got the plan to get us out of this mess? I sat down with Andy Haldane, former chief economist at the Bank of England. He isn't impressed with either of the main parties. Labour shouldn't have dumped their green spending pledges, he says, and he doesn't think Conservative plans to cut taxes will work. Also tonight, pressure mounts on Keir Starmer. Labour's candidate for the Rochdale by-election made what's been described as completely and utterly unacceptable comments. So why is the party standing by him? Meanwhile, Lord Cameron urges Israel to stop and think seriously before launching an assault on the Gazan city of Rafah, saying he's very concerned about reports of a ground invasion. Bosses of water companies which spew out illegal sewage are facing a ban on their bonuses. Both Labour and the Lib Dems say it's too little, too late. And as Joe Biden trolls conspiracy theorists who claim Taylor Swift is a secret plant to help him win this year's US election, we'll talk memes and counter-memes. All that and more with Seb Payne and John McDonnell, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. It feels like right now we have a paralysis of policy. Government business is snail-like, with MPs sent home early on half of the days that Parliament sat last year because they had nothing else to do. And Labour, too, have ditched their boldest policy offering, rowing back on the plan to spend £28 billion a year on green investment. Now, there's a reason for the paralysis. It's an election year. And that means, sadly, the focus will be on short-term campaigning and not long-term decision-making. I've been thinking about this because today I interviewed Andy Haldane, the Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Arts. He's a former Chief Economist at the Bank of England and someone it's really worth listening to. He was a lonely voice who called it right over interest rates ahead of the inflation crisis. And he was brimming with policy ideas. He told me he laments the fact Labour has ditched its £28 billion pledge and we need more investment. He wants a new Ministry for Growth. He wants to turbocharge devolution in the regions. And it's the kind of policy ambition that, frankly, we're just not hearing enough about in Westminster. And of course, that will change when the manifestos are published, and whoever wins the election will then have a mandate to make real change. But it could be almost an entire year before that happens. So 2024 could become a bit of a write-off, a year of campaigning rather than policy making, of showing rather than doing, of showing off as well. It's all a little bit depressing, isn't it? Well, crisis, what crisis? The Prime Minister today dismissed gloomy forecasts of a looming recession and insisted that things are starting to look up for the economy.
At the start of this year, I really believe that the economy has turned a corner and we're heading in the right direction. You can see inflation has come down from 11% to 4%. Mortgage rates are starting to come down. Wages have been rising consistently now. Because of the economic circumstances are improving, we've been able to cut taxes. Someone on an average salary of £35,000 in January this year started receiving a tax cut worth £450. That shows that the plan is working. And if we stick with the plan, we'll be able to deliver a peace of mind that there is a brighter future ahead for everyone.
Shortly after Rishi Sunak spoke, Nationwide said it would be increasing some of its tracker and fixed-rate mortgages by up to 0.25% from tomorrow, increasing fears that the country is still in for a very rocky period. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to someone who knows more than most about the UK economy, Andy Haldane. He worked at the Bank of England for more than 30 years and was its chief economist. He's now chief executive of the Royal Society of Arts. I caught up with him a little earlier. Thank you so much for being on the programme. What would you say is the priority, or should be the priority, for the economy?
I think it's growth. I think we've gone now getting on for 2 years without growth. The economy's been stood still for 2 years, and that's put huge pressure, Sophie, on households, huge pressure on public services, huge pressure on local governments. And the only way to break free of the constraints on them is by us growing our economy sustainably in a way that hasn't happened for the past 24 months.
I'm keen to talk about the sort of solutions, if you like, but just to look at the context of it. So do you think that growth is going to stay low, or potentially for the rest of the year?
I think the next year, if you believe the mainstream forecasters, they would tell you growth set to remain below 1% this year. We've still got that squeeze from higher interest rates. Although people's pay packets are now nudging up faster than prices are nudging up, nonetheless, people are still poorer than they were 2 or 3 years ago, and we won't recover the levels of their living standards until perhaps 2026, 2027. So that's a big headwind still.
Is there a risk of a recession?
Well, I mean, we'll find out later this week, actually, whether growth in the fourth quarter of last year turned negative. And if it did, that would technically count as 2 quarters of negative growth and hence a recession. But underneath that, really, the picture is still of a flatlining, a pancaking in the economy that most likely, I think, will persist over the next 12 months at least.
Do you think the bank are being a bit slow to cut rates?
They were slow on the way up, and we know that now. And that's one of the factors that contributed to inflation getting away from us. I mean, the good news now is inflation is coming down at a fair old click, from 10 now down to 4. I think by the spring, we could be looking at inflation rates back to around target, Sophie, around 2%. And I think the risk as inflation comes down at a fair old click is that the bank might be a bit slow in cutting in the same way as a bit slow in raising. That's where I would put the balance of risks right now.
If you still had a vote, would you be cutting rates already?
I'd be cutting rates now, and probably would have been from the tail end of last year. I think at that point we knew that inflation, although still a bit too high, was coming down, and the essence of monetary policy is to look ahead, not to where inflation is, but to where inflation will be. We now have a good degree of confidence that by, as I say, Easter time, inflation will be within spitting distance of target. We see pay inflation now coming down, also at a fair old clip. So it strikes me the balance of risks now is skewed towards growth rather than inflation. We need to support and stimulate growth that remains, as I say, largely absent as things stand.
You talk about how difficult things have been for people being poorer now than a few years ago. And of course, there is a pay dispute here at the Royal Society of Arts as well. Do you have sympathy with the campaign for a pay rise?
Well, there's no question that across the whole country, there's been a big squeeze on pay packets. The biggest squeeze probably since the 1950s on pay packets. That's been true right across the piece. It's also the case, though, that the biggest cause of that squeeze on pay was the high level of inflation. And that's why the bank had to put rates up to squeeze inflation back down to target. Ultimately, this is about what is affordable for individual organisations and for the country as a whole. And of course, I've got a huge amount of sympathy for all the households and all the people whose pay packets have been squeezed. But ultimately, this is about affordability.
Not everyone agrees. I mean, you have had a few people boycotting the organisation, Chris Packen, Yanis Varoufakis, example. What would you say to them?
Well, ultimately, what you need to do as a leader is to ensure that the organisation is run on a financially sustainable basis. No one benefits from running unsustainable finances, whether it's this organisation or any other, and recklessness, ultimately, with pay that causes financial stability problems is not good for anyone's jobs or anyone's pay packets, and that's why we've had to work in a very prudent fashion, really important.
You talked there about being responsible, leading an organisation and financially as well. How would you grade the government, the way that they've been managing the economy?
Well, I mean, it's with growth low, that makes it very tricky to manage the balance sheet of the government as it is the balance sheet of a charity or any business. There's no question about that. The way the government manages its balance sheet right now is through a set of fiscal rules, included among which are a rule about debt and getting debt down on a 5-year horizon. Now, that sounds sensible, given that levels of debt for the government are now very high. Nonetheless, I think the risk those rules pose is that we don't make enough investment today to support growth tomorrow. And that's why, personally, I would favour fiscal rules that cut the government some more slack to enable it to invest today for growth tomorrow.
You're talking a lot about investment. It feels to me like if there is any slack, the government will be minded to use it for tax cuts, particularly in the budget and maybe as soon as the budget. What's your take on tax cuts? Would that be stimulus for the economy?
Well, it would be stimulus. The question is it the right type of stimulus? Tax cuts tend to support, depends a bit where they fall, but if it's tax cuts for households, they tend to support spending by households rather than investment. And what the UK needs right now is investment. So if it were me spending my pound, it would be not on tax cuts, but rather on investment of various types, whether investment in technology or innovation, or investment in people, in their training. We are falling short on both fronts. That's one of the main reasons why growth here in the UK is so anemic, a lack of investment in both kit and in people.
Investment, Labour has just pulled a whole load of investment, haven't they? The 28 billion a year that they were preparing to spend on green investment. They say that because of the fiscal picture that they would have inherited, if they do win the election, then they just can't get to that number. Do you think that that was the right decision to scale that back?
I think it's a shame. I mean, I think back to when that Green Prosperity Plan was first hatched. It was big, it was bold, it was ambitious. It led the world, actually, in terms of its scale. And we now have seen a number of other countries playing catch-up, putting forward their own plans. So I think the scaling back of our plans in the UK, at the same time as other countries have stepped up their plans, is unfortunate for two reasons. One, it slows our transition to net zero, which is really important. And two, we do need that investment. And the Green Prosperity Plan was about that extra dose of investment to stimulate growth. So I rather lament the sort of paring back of those plans.
Do you think Labour should be a bit braver than you think when it comes to spending, to invest?
Well, I think whoever it is in charge right now, I'd like to see a little bit more boldness about the economy. I mean, thinking boldness around investment, I think is what we need to get the economy going. I understand the fiscal constraints, but I also think the rules that we've sort of boxed ourselves in on might not be as effective as they need to be to stimulate and support that investment.
You were talking about green spending there. We were just chatting earlier, weren't we, about the North East, and you were saying that how it's one of the areas where you're quite excited potentially about the future because one of the industries that is a growth there is the green.
It is. I mean, there are lots of areas, I mean, well-kept secret, but lots of business sectors across the UK are doing well, and green tech in its many and various forms is one of them. I mean, it's funny, Sophie, I think there's a huge amount of energy. I mean, it's not here in Westminster and Whitehall, but it is out and about across the UK regions and nations right now. You know, they're going to be newly emboldened with powers, we hope, and they are crafting and hatching very ambitious plans. Let's take the North East. That could be a green tech super hub in future. And that would be great for jobs, be great for giving the area a new narrative about their economy. And I see there real potential, as I do elsewhere across the UK actually, to be the sort of bottom-up approach to national growth. And that gives me real optimism, probably optimism beyond this year, but nonetheless optimism that growth is there at the local level.
Which is actually almost the counter-narrative to one that you often hear, that, you know, levelling up has failed, that we need to do much more to support the regions. But you find positivity, I guess, optimism there.
I do. I think it's there. I mean, newly emboldened leaders are drawing up plans, ambitious plans, to take their regions to the next level. Of course, that will need some money, some of it from government, but a larger part of it from the private sector. And the good news there is the world is actually awash with cash. We just need to find a way of getting more of that private cash into parts of the UK other than London and the South East, and that could really light the fuse on growth in the UK's regions.
We started talking about what you think the priority for the economy should be, which was growth. I think we should perhaps end by talking about your kind of policy priority. You know, if you were, PM for a day, you can push something through, get both houses to back it. What would you go for?
Yeah, so I think it's actually about, if at one thing, it would be the distribution of powers. Mm-hmm. In two ways, I would be much more bolder, less incremental in the powers I give to local leaders to become masters of their own destiny, because that, I think, is where the energy is in the country right now, and that's where the potential is greatest to unlock people, unlock communities, and to grow then the national economy. And the second thing I'd do, Sophie, is to split the Treasury in two and have it confine itself to managing the public finances and create a separate economic or growth ministry to take charge of the reins in driving that growth I mentioned was so important for solving those problems of diminished pay packets and struggling public services and struggling incomes. I think we need that singular focus, rather like the Bank of England's singular focus, which was given back in '97 as the first act. We need a singular focus now on growth, and that means a ministerial singular focus on growth, and that would mean something doing different at the Treasury than is the case currently.
Thank you very much indeed, Andy Haldane.
Thank you, Sophie.
Right, let's bring in our duo for tonight, shall we? The author and director of the Onward think tank, Seb Payne, and the former Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell. Great to have you both on the show tonight. It's always interesting to hear from Andy Haldane, these people who are still very involved, but kind of slightly, I guess, freer to speak their minds, say what they really think. Anything stand out to you from the interview, John?
As an aside, can I say thanks for raising the dispute at the RSA? Because I've been on those picket lines. He should get back to the negotiating table. And what he didn't mention is actually he's been found guilty at an employment tribunal of sacking a trade unionist unlawfully. So it's a message to him, get around the negotiating table like other employers do. It's interesting, there's not an awful lot I could disagree with that. In terms of the investment, that's exactly what we need. I've been saying in terms of, I agree with him with regard to the Labour drop in the 28 billion plan.
Do you? That's interesting. Why is
Yes, and I haven't made a fuss about it because I think they're going to have to return to it at some stage. Keir said we wanted to have clean energy by 2030. He wants us to be the growth engine, really, high levels of growth, productive growth in the G7. We can't do that without investment. And the 28 billion is the sort of investment that you need to put in to get that scale of growth, basically.
It feels like the Labour leadership is saying, no, we can still get to the target. It's absolutely fine. We just spend a bit less money. You don't buy that, then?
No, I think we have to be straight with people.
So is he not being straight
He mentioned
with
the Green New Deal. It was me who launched the Green New Deal when I was Shadow Chancellor. You need a level of investment initially to get that scale of target really achieved. And I think he's right on that one. And
so do you think Keir Starmer isn't being straight with people then?
I think he's made a mistake. My argument now is I can see his concern about interest. When I launched the Green New Deal, interest rates were incredibly low. I can understand that now. But inflation's coming down. Interest rates will start coming down, and what we've got to do is revisit this, and as those interest rates come down, we've got to increase the level of investment. Otherwise, we will not have clean energy by 2030. We will not have the growth and productivity that we need.
What's your take, Seb? He's calling for more investment, isn't he, to boost growth?
He is, and I thought it was actually the other parts of Andy Haldane's interview that I agreed with. I thought talking about radical devolution absolutely has to be top of the agenda, and I think you and I would agree on that, John.
Jamie Driscoll up in the North East he was citing virtually.
And you've obviously got, Lord Halshin in Tees Valley and Andy Street in the West Midlands, Andy Burnham in the North West, who I think among them are the most interesting politicians in the country at the moment, who are doing some of the best redevelopment. And I think that, that devolution agenda does need to be turbocharged, and at my think tank Onward we've called consistently for mayors to have more tax powers and more spending powers, and that's what Andy Haldane was calling for.
He doesn't fancy tax cuts though, does he? What do you think about that? Not the right kind of stimulus.
The one thing that I don't agree with Andy Haldane on there is the idea about dropping the investment programme. And I know this comes from your time as Shadow Chancellor, John, but the fact is Labour's plans didn't add up on that. They had an unfunded spending commitment
rubbish.
on their 28
rubbish.
billion, and the issue they've they've
rubbish.
got... It's not rubbish, John.
Look, if you look at the grey book I published, I'm the first Shadow Chancellor to publish the costings of a manifesto on 2 elections. And if you look at the costings, they're all there. The issue you've got...
Not within Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules, which are not what you have,
Our fiscal rule was also to reduce debt on a rolling programme. And that fiscal rule was developed by a range of experts, including Joe Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner economist.
But the Labour leadership now is in a different place on that, and they're not taking your approach, and what they want is debt in a different place. And I think that 2030 target that you mentioned there about decarbonising the power grid, they're still going to try and make that add up. But I think what Andy Haldane is right is there is so much unlocked growth in this country, and if you do the devolution, the powers to get to it, that's really important.
I'm a GLC Chair of Finance. I look on regional government. And it was Thatcher who abolished us. We're reinventing it now, thank goodness.
In a much better way. So
I love it. This is going to go on and on, isn't it? I can see it. Great debate. Thank you very much, both of you. Well, all the latest political news will naturally feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have that extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and the New Statesman's associate political editor, Rachel Cunliffe. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, an apology from the Labour candidate in Rochdale for saying that Israel had allowed the October 7 Hamas attacks to give it cover to bomb Gaza. Rather than suspend him, Labour's leaving him to fight a by-election. What does that say about the party's progress on anti-Semitism?
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
More flares going off, a volley of rocks, cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. We have now left Italy and entered France. Nobody's asked to check our identity. Made by people who dare to challenge.
Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why?
Meeting you. Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
It's devastating, actually.
Hello, welcome back. Well, the Conservative Party tonight have called on Keir Starmer to withdraw support for Labour's candidates in the Rochdale by-election and suspend him. Azhar Ali apologised after he reportedly said that Israel had been warned about the 7th of October Hamas attack and allowed it to happen. The Mail on Sunday published a recording of him saying Israel deliberately took the security off so they could use the attack as grounds to bomb Gaza. Well, it's too late for Labour to change its candidate in Thursday's by-election, and Mr Ali hasn't been suspended. So it's all reopened, barely healed wounds over the party's handling of allegations of anti-Semitism. Here's Sky's political correspondent, Rob Powell.
Antisemitism has been a stain on our party.
Sir Keir Starmer's first words as Labour leader.
And I will tear out this poison by its roots and judge success by the return of our Jewish members.
Now some questioning his commitment after his party's candidate for the Rochdale by-election was caught allegedly saying Israel allowed the Hamas attacks to happen to justify invading Gaza. Azhar Ali has since apologised.
Is it acceptable for Azhar Ali to remain a candidate?
The Labour leader dodging questions today, but the party standing by their candidate.
And Councillor Ali has to learn lessons from that. I think that we also take into account his reaction to this in recent days. That is why he continues to be our candidate up there in Rochdale. We'll continue to campaign up there in Rochdale.
Associate itself.
But for some, that's not good enough. One campaign group has now filed a complaint against Azhar Ali, something that could lead to party officials taking action, even if Sir Keir Starmer doesn't.
Since when did we put the colour of the rosette before fighting hatred? I thought we'd learnt this lesson. We've been there before. We don't put careers or the colour of the rosette before fighting hate, before our morals. You know, this is just Rochdale, but the country is watching.
The Tories also spy a political opportunity, with ministers calling on Labour to suspend their campaign, given it's now too late to change candidates. Azhar Ali was seemingly hidden from the Rochdale trail today. Rival party Reform UK accused Sir Keir Starmer of failing to protect the Jewish community, while the Workers' Party of Britain said Labour was now pushing forward a deeply unpopular candidate.
While condemnation of Azhar Ali's comments has been near universal, some in Labour worry that pulling support could lead to a more divisive candidate taking the seat. Others point to Mr Ali's previous track record of supporting the Jewish community and describe his remarks as out of character.
An old issue causing new problems for Sir Keir Starmer, a question of judgment and political priorities. With an election looming, it won't be the last. Rob Powell, Sky News in Westminster.
Well, on your screen right now is the full list of candidates and the political parties they represent in the Rochdale by-election. You can see all those candidates on your screens now. It's been held on Thursday, the 29th of February. OK, well, I'm joined now by Lord Ian Austin, who quit the Labour Party back in 2019, citing a culture of anti-Semitism under Jeremy Corbyn. He now sits in the Lords as an independent. Good to have you on the programme.
Thank you.
What do you make of Keir Starmer's handling of this?
Well, I think they're in a really difficult position. I can understand the dilemma they're in. And I'm sure that if these revelations had emerged before nominations closed and before the ballot papers are printed, this guy wouldn't have lasted 3 seconds.
But what do they do now? Because the allegations have emerged. They can't replace the candidate.
Well,
what should they do?
It's enormously difficult for them. And look, I understand the dilemma they're in. Look, I think under no circumstances should anybody vote for George Galloway. I think he's a veteran troublemaker, an extremist. I think he stirs up division wherever he goes. No, I mean, I wouldn't campaign, I wouldn't support Azhar Ali either. I understand the dilemma, the Labour Party's in here. I mean, it's...
I guess the question, though, is how does the leadership handle it? Because, look, I get that it's a nightmare situation, but there are options. They could either decide that, OK, it's happened, we can't replace him, we're going to go in, we're going to campaign for him to the next Labour candidate. They could say, we can't replace him as candidate, but he'll have the whip removed, he won't represent the party at the next election. Is that something you think that they should look at?
I'm sure they'll be looking at this very carefully. I think what this shows is just how much work still needs to be done to clear up the poison of anti-Jewish racism and extremism that poisoned the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, and if I may say so, John McDonnell and the rest of them as well. And Keir Starmer has taken this on. He's made some progress with this, but he's got much more work to do. That's what this affair shows. And I think it shows something else as well. Why is a conflict 3,000 miles away dominating an election campaign here in the UK? Why is it that our streets are taken over every Saturday by people chanting support for racism and terrorism? I'm not saying that everybody who goes on those marches is a racist, but if the only country you campaign against, the only country you want to see abolished, is the only Jewish one, don't tell me that you're not an anti-Semite. And the people organising these marches and the people in senior positions on them are not doing nearly enough to deal with the obscene racism that we're seeing on placards and we're hearing being chanted every single Saturday, intimidating Jewish people out of coming into central London. It's a complete disgrace.
I will be coming back to you, John, later. The thing is, though, I absolutely get what you're saying about anti-Semitism in the UK, the rising attacks, but just looking at the Labour leadership here, because some people will be saying, look, Keir Starmer has done an awful lot to try and rebuild ties with the Jewish community, and yet this guy has said that the Hamas attack was not known about and allowed by Israel. I mean, girls being raped, babies being killed.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, you can see how if he doesn't distance himself from that candidate, that's a problem for them.
What he said is a complete and utter disgrace.
And there's also, you know, thoughts about, I guess, different standards being applied too. You know, Diane Abbott, for example, tweeting to say, Kate Osmer removed as a Labour MP for suggesting Gaza might be genocide, but Azhar Ali, the Labour Rochdale candidate, accuses Israel of deliberately allowing the October 7th massacre, and he gets full support.
Look, I think what he said is a complete disgrace. I mean, he's a mad conspiracy theorist. He's not fit to be a Labour MP. But he's on the ballot, and that's what they've got to... That's the dilemma they're in. And that's... I'm sure they'll be receiving lots of conflicting advice, and that's the issue, you know, that they've got to resolve. And... but, you know, look, I think the real tragedy... Well, there's lots of tragedies here. But I hoped that Galloway coming in Rochdale, was going to be the opportunity for Labour to stand up to extremism, to take Galloway on, to speak up for the... Look, the vast majority of Muslim people in our country are just as appalled by racism and extremism and terrorism as everyone else. But it's high time the Labour Party took a lead, took the extremists on, and gave mainstream Muslims the confidence to speak up. And I'd hoped that Rochdale would be the start of that. Sadly, you know, clearly that's not going to be.
Keir Starmer once said that, you know, he would feel like he changed the party and rebuilt trust in the party when Labour MPs who left over anti-Semitism started to rejoin. Are you thinking about rejoining Labour?
I mean, look, I'm not planning to do that. I think there's a long way to go. I think that's what this shows. He's made some progress. I think he's sincere in that. But, you know, there are people in senior positions who went along with it all. And there are people... Look, I'll be honest about this. There are people in the Labour Party. If you really want to show the Labour Party's changed, right, I would kick out John McDonnell. I would kick out all of those people. All of that. I mean, I really would, because I think that, you know, a long history of supporting extremism, all of that, and, you know, I think they've got to deal with that as well. I really do.
John McDonnell, do you want to come back?
It's difficult to deal with the sort of unreality of it. Ian has had a long and obsessional hatred of Jeremy Corbyn on a whole range of issues. I think he's just... It's produced an instability in him, and as a result of this is the sort of behaviour that we get. He's been made a lord, you know, a full-time job for life, by Boris Johnson for attacking Labour. That's why he was given the lordship. I never heard Ian calling out Boris Johnson and his anti-Semitic tropes in the writings that he undertook then, or his anti-race, whatever, call out the racism that Boris Johnson had undertaken as well, attacking black people. So I don't take him seriously. And with regard to the attacks on the people who are marching to secure a ceasefire in Palestine at the moment, in Gaza at the moment, I've been on those demonstrations. The organisers work cooperatively with the police. If there's any extremist language or anything like that, they work with the police and people have been arrested. The bulk of them, and I walk with Jewish people on those marches. I always have a Jewish person with me. And I've been with Namwad, the young Jewish people who've been demonstrating. What do? They sing for peace. So to denigrate them, I think, is unacceptable. But Ian's got his own particular problems on all of this, and I think it's best to move on.
Look, I don't hate Jeremy Corbyn at all, but I hate what they did to the Labour Party, a party with a proud record of fighting racism, standing up for justice and equality, poisoned by racists and extremists.
Please,
and it's a complete and utter disgrace.
It's
a complete disgrace.
Okay,
it's not as serious to debate when you have this level of conversation.
Let's talk about the way that Keir Starmer has handled the situation in Rochdale. Seb, what do you think Keir Starmer should do?
Well, at this point, Keir Starmer became Labour leader and promised a sea change from the previous Labour leadership and took a lot of series of tough actions to demonstrate that. The problem he's now got is he's sort of floating in the wind somewhat, because we've seen these comments and we'll see if there's more comments that come out about what Azhar Ali has said. And at this point, I think he has got to take tougher action than he is now. Otherwise, it's just proof that Labour really hasn't maybe changed from the problems it's had with anti-Semitism. You know, you suggested Labour could say he won't serve as a Labour MP if he is elected, or he won't stand in the general election, because if Labour's trying to speak to those people who did abandon the party, who did feel there was a problem, John, under Jeremy's leadership, they've been looking for that confidence to be restored. They saw what's happened in terms of, you know, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, various changes that have been made in terms of adopting the IHRA definition on anti-Semitism. Now they look at it, it looks like, did he really mean it? Was he really pushing for it on that basis? And for the voters of Rochdale, what a choice they've got to have now. And I think, you know, ultimately, it's an awful situation for those voters.
John, what would you do?
IHRA was adopted under Jeremy Corbyn and myself. What would I do? I think now, yes, it was adopted by us. I think that the reality is they've got to explain to the electorate that this is unacceptable behaviour and statement itself, and that action will be taken against the candidate. And it will be, and it most probably will be the withdrawal of the whip. That's all they can do at this point in time in the middle of an election campaign like this. But there has to be a consistency of approach as well. What's happening at the moment so far is that this candidate has made these statements, which are dreadful, unacceptable, but he's remained as a Labour candidate. Yet you quoted Kate Osmore. She spoke in emotionally, I accept that, but it was the day after the ICJ judgment. In addition to that, Andy McDonnell was suspended and the whip withdrawn from a statement he never made. It was misreported by the Times. The journalists accepted that and withdrew it and apologised. So there has to be consistency about this.
I think one quick thing on Azhar Ali as well is that, you know, Nick Thomas-Symonds has been on the broadcast round saying that it was an online conspiracy theory. So either what kind of person is starting to be for Parliament who is buying into a Facebook online conspiracy theory, or he actually believed it. And either way, I just don't think he's a fit person to be an MP.
You know, there's online scams and online scams. You know, I'm not sure it's the same as, you know, getting a sort of weird DHL text message or something like that, is it? Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Indeed. Well, let's talk a little bit more now about the Israel-Hamas war and the growing concern over Israel's military operation in Gaza. Today, the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, urged Israel to pull back from the city of Rafah, where dozens of Palestinians were reportedly killed in airstrikes overnight. More than 1 million people are sheltering there after fleeing from their homes elsewhere in the Gaza Strip. If you listen to him, it does feel like Lord Cameron is perhaps taking a stronger line than the UK government previously has towards Israel.
We are very concerned about what is happening in Rafah, because let's be clear, the people there, many of them have moved 4, 5, 6 times before getting there, and it really, we think, is impossible to see how you can fight a war amongst these people. There's nowhere for them to go. They can't go south into Egypt, they can't go north and back to their homes because many have been destroyed. So we are very concerned about the situation, and we want Israel to stop and think very seriously before it takes any further action. But above all, what we want is an immediate pause in the fighting, and we want that pause to lead to a ceasefire, a sustainable ceasefire, without a return to further fighting.
Well, this all came as Lord Cameron announced 4 Israeli settlers in the West Bank accused of human rights abuses would be sanctioned by the UK, saying extremist Israeli settlers are threatening Palestinians, often at gunpoint, and forcing them off land that is rightfully theirs. Well, let's bring in Seb Payne and John McDonnell now. Seb, to start with you first, it feels like David Cameron is, I guess, pushing the government into a slightly stronger position on Israel than they've previously taken.
I think, obviously, Lord Cameron is experienced in foreign affairs, having been Prime Minister, and I think one of the reasons he took up that role is the experience and the fact that as a former Prime Minister, his words have a greater weight than a normal UK Foreign Secretary. I think the other thing is that he is using that to try and make sure that, you know, to put restraint on what Israel is doing at this point, because we've obviously seen huge numbers of civilian deaths throughout this operation that's happened in Gaza, and I think that, you know, there's a lot of concern growing, not just in the UK, but in America, in other Western capitals too, about what we're being seen as a result of the operation following October the 7th. And I think David Cameron has realised that there is an opportunity for him here to make a real difference, to try and shape Israel's thinking on what he's doing there. Because when he first came in, obviously, the UK still remained full said behind Israel on this, but is trying to make sure that it is acting, you know, with the aim of removing Hamas and trying to restrain civilian targets as much as possible.
I mean, he's almost taking a stronger line than Keir Starmer on this.
I welcome that, but it's too little, too late. We're talking now, children are dying in Gaza at the moment. We know they're dying because the bombs are already raining down on them. Others are cowering. Families are cowering together on the basis that they'd rather die together because they've got nowhere else to go. And so, I welcome that, but it's too little, too late. And what I think is the only solution, the only thing that we should be saying that has any meaning is an immediate ceasefire. And we've got to remember that the IDF, the Israeli Defence Force, are using weapons that we've supplied them, that we've assisted them in. And I actually do think war crimes are being committed. Article 8 says it's a war crime if you use weapons of indeterminate effect. That's what bombs do. Article 8 says it's a war crime if you deny people the right, basically food, water, medical supplies. That's what's happening. Article 8 says it's a war crime if you're dispossessing people from their homes and their area. That's what we're doing at the moment. That's what the Israelis are doing at the moment. We need a stronger response from the UK to put pressure on Biden because he's the only one the Israelis will listen to.
OK, it's a really difficult situation. We're out of time. I'm sure we've got plenty more to say on this as well. Thank you both very much indeed. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, water bosses of companies who spill sewage in our rivers will lose their bonuses from April. But is it enough to stop the dumping? That's next. Some breaking news to bring you now. We've been talking about the Rochdale by-election and the Labour candidate. And I can tell you now some breaking news because Labour has withdrawn its support for Azhar Ali as their candidate in the Rochdale by-election. We can bring in our political correspondent, Rob Powell. What's happened?
Well, it's a complete change of position from the Labour leadership. Yesterday morning, they were maintaining, after this story was published overnight into Sunday, that he would be the candidate. This morning, that position was the same. We were being assured that the campaign was continuing as normal. In the last 5 minutes, we've had a statement that's come through from a Labour Party spokesperson saying, following new information about further comments made by Azhar Ali coming to light today, the Labour Party has withdrawn its support for Azhar Ali as our candidate in the Rochdale by-election. So they are saying something more has come forward. We don't know precisely what these comments are. Quite frankly, it's difficult to see, given the seriousness and the severity of the initial comments that came to light, why this would prompt action when the previous comments wouldn't. The statement also goes on to say Sir Keir Starmer has changed Labour, that it's unrecognisable from the party in 2019. We understand these are unusual circumstances. Given nominations have now closed, he cannot be replaced. So you're in a position now where he will still be on the ballot paper, but he is not being endorsed by the Labour leader, and presumably shadow cabinet members and the Labour Party will not be campaigning for him in Rochdale and not telling people to vote for him.
Extraordinary stuff. Rob, thank you very much indeed. Rob Powell there. Well, let's bring John and Seb back in, shall we? I mean, John, what a mess.
It's what we predicted, isn't it, a few minutes ago, just on the basis of what we'd heard so far. If there is more stuff, as said, it's inevitable, I'm afraid. And it is a total mess. It's absolute chaos.
What happens now when it comes to the by-election? Labour can't put forward a candidate? I mean...
We'll have a by-election. And the Greens are in the same position, aren't they, where the Green candidates are still there, but no one's campaigning. So it's absolute chaos. And I just think George Galloway will be over the moon at all of this at the moment, to be honest. And I think there's a whole range of issues now that will be debated within the community about where people will go in terms of the votes on the day itself. I've never seen anything like this, to be honest.
It's absolutely extraordinary.
It's unprecedented.
And Seb, I mean, you've attempted to become a candidate as well, right, on behalf of the Conservative Party. Do you think there's an issue with the way that we select candidates, with the whole process is run?
The thing that's amazing here is what scrutiny has been done of Azhar Ali.
Labour, under Keir Starmer, they prided themselves on doing all this due diligence, didn't they?
Exactly, and he said that he was going to, have zero tolerance, and we have not seen zero tolerance because there's been a double standard of how he's treated different people in Labour, which John was referring to earlier, and then now in this situation, there are these new comments, and the original comments were so appalling and gut-wrenchingly awful. It's hard to think what's going beyond that, and there may be stuff in the papers tomorrow that speaks to this, but ultimately, I think, and dare say it's yet another U-turn by Keir Starmer here, that he was standing by Azhar Ali just an hour ago and is now basically said that he's not behind him, and we'll have to see what these comments happen. But really, again, go back to members of the Jewish community who have been looking to Labour to say, can we trust you again? And Keir Starmer said time and time again, there'll be zero tolerance on anti-Semitism. We are going to be with you again. And this is how they've seen responded. So you can see why people are so annoyed and upset by this. And for the by-election, I mean, the thing is going to become a farce now that you've got two parties who have got candidates on the ballot paper, and then, of course, George Galloway as well, who's standing there for his party. And you just have to think of when the voters go to the poll on the 29th of February, what on earth are they going to do, and who on earth is going to be returned? Because Azhar Ali is going to get no support now from Labour, no shadow cabinet ministers. So, I mean, who knows what happens, but this mess is on Keir Starmer, I think.
The Labour Party have got to be open about this, and we've got to find out what this further information is, and you can only judge on the basis of that further information. But obviously they think it's serious enough to do this.
I always feel sorry for the front benchers who have to go out on the difficult media rounds defending a position, and then it all changes just hours later. Thanks both very much indeed responding to that breaking news that Labour have withdrawn their support for Azhar Ali as a candidate in the Rochdale by-election. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up. Now, I didn't have Swifties versus MAGA on my 2024 bingo card, but the Taylor Swift is the subject of some seriously outlandish claims from Trump-supporting social media. We're talking conspiracy theories and the Super Bowl next.
minutes, and now it's coming from both sides. And it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms, I can put my entire hand round. This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Hello, welcome back. Now, 2024 will be a big year for democracy. And where there are elections, there are attack ads, smear campaigns and conspiracy theories. Now, there is currently a truly bizarre theory doing the rounds on the MAGA supporting right in the US concerning Taylor Swift and rigging the Super Bowl so her boyfriend's team win, so she can then use the win to endorse Joe Biden. Got it? Still with me, right? Well, Donald Trump has promoted the theory to his followers hours before the Super Bowl kicked off. The former president posted on social media, the platform Truth Social, saying that there's no way she could endorse Joe Biden and be disloyal to him, the man who, in his words, made her so much money. Silly as it sounds, when the Kansas City Chiefs won, Joe Biden posted on X a one-sentence reaction, just like we drew it up, along with a photo of Dark Brandon. And that tweet has now been viewed over 140 million times. So is this the moment that Joe Biden has secured the White House for a second term? Well, no, of course not. Amazing. But back here in Westminster, we are not without our own claims of plot, so we can't be too smart about this all.
This group of men have installed Rishi Sunak, who they decided 7 years ago would be Prime Minister, by the way, and they just used Boris to get the majority to get Rishi in. And all the evidence for that, legally checked, is in the book.
Well, let's bring our duo for tonight, John and Sarah. I know, we're trying to keep the laughter back there. You just can't make it up. It's extraordinary.
Whoever's doing the conspiracy for Taylor Swift, if they could get Liverpool to win the league and Jurgen Klopp to endorse Labour, I'll go with it.
Sheffield Wednesday staying up. That really would be the great escape. I'm absolutely on board for that.
Taylor Swift is she's just obviously so big.
Admit it, you're a Swiftie.
I'm a
Come
Swiftie.
on, tell them.
I'm sorry.
We've got an expert in. This is why we got Seb in, obviously. Not for his political knowledge, but for his Taylor Swift knowledge.
With his tickets.
Exactly, with my tickets to see Taylor Swift this summer at Wembley Stadium. But the thing that's so fascinating about Taylor is just how big of a cultural figure she is, and an economic figure, as we were saying, kind of what she does is like a small country almost in her worth and pounds. And she sort of is completely over America and over American politics and dominating elevates it in such a big way that everyone is obsessed with her. And the fact this has gone from the Super Bowl to rigging an election to Joe Biden really does boggle the mind. And even Donald Trump doesn't want to believe the conspiracy theory. When Donald Trump's not believing the conspiracy theory, maybe it's not actually that true.
Key Labour economic policy: bring SWIFT to UK, boost our economy.
I'd say, John, it's actually a bit more like your favourite Taylor Swift song, which is blank check, blank space, sorry.
Oh, dear.
Good one.
Oh, dear. Favourite Taylor Swift song, then?
Actually, it is blank space,
There
not
you
blank
go.
check.
There you go. Lots of unanimous appreciation for Taylor Swift on the programme tonight. She's great. I'm
I'll
a
have to
Swiftie
tell my
as well.
grandchildren this.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one.
He's going to go home and listen to them now.
I mean, there's a serious point, though, isn't there? I think about the conspiracy theories in the elections. I mean, are we gearing up for this in the UK as well?
Yeah, manic. Actually, there's a lot of there's a group campaigning at the moment for changes in legislation, probably in the criminal justice bill, with regard particularly around fake news and the use of fake, videos of people. The deepfakes. And I think that is key. I think that is quite worrying that we could be invaded with that.
This is in some ways the first AI election. The last couple of elections were all about social media. What you're going to see now, of course, if you think, remember when the Pope was seen wearing that big Versace puffer jacket? Like, that was the start of what we might see in this election, when people create deep fakes and they create things that look so real and sound so real that people just take it as it is. And what we've got to do is train people to be vigilant, to look out for this stuff.
Thanks both very much indeed, John and Seb there. Well, that is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Greg Milan. See you tomorrow.